Test. Good morning, everyone. Okay. For those who are online, am I audible? Could you please, one of you in the Zoom, say something? So I would like to test whether I hear your voice or not. Because I don't think I can hear your voice via the... But let me ask the IT first.
Hello?
Oh, yes, no, great. Now I can hear your voice, Lisa. Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth plenary this morning with the topic of media and human rights. So today we're going to have four speakers. I think four of them we're going to be presenting online via Zoom. And all of you, the presenters would have 20 minutes maximum for presenting your idea, your paper, and then after that we'll continue with the discussion and answer. So I see here we have Lisa Bruton. Hi Lisa, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, great. And thank you so much for coming. And also we have Meta Madonna. Mbak Meta, how are you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm fine.
Okay, great. I think I only saw two of you that are going to be presenting today. Maybe the other two will join later on. So I would like to proceed with the first speaker. Maybe Lisa would like to go first. Is that okay? Lisa would be presenting her article or paper with regard to surviving a pandemic and media and human rights in Burma on Myanmar. Please, Lisa, 20 minutes time is yours. Thank you.
Okay, let me share my screen here and start my timer. Okay, can you everybody see okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Oh, thank you. So today I'm talking a little bit about Myanmar, Burma. And I want to talk a little bit about the 2021 coup and the pandemic, because paradoxically, what I want to argue is that the coup especially has created an opening, unlike any other in Myanmar's contemporary history, in which the full range of not only civil and political rights, but also communication-related social, economic, and cultural rights can be fully realized. This is kind of a paradoxical argument in the midst of a coup, but this is, I think, really a ground-shaking, momentous moment for the country. I've been watching the country for 3 decades now, and I've never been more hopeful, actually, than I am right now. But in order to make this argument, I have to give you a bit of history. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context in which the coup happened, what was going on before that, the few decades before that. I'll talk a little bit about discourse, human rights discourse, and the global hierarchy of human rights as I and others see it, and how this relates to colonialism on the one hand, but the current situation more importantly on the other hand. So talk a little bit about the pre-pandemic challenges, and then why the pandemic and the coup were so important, and what human rights implications there are currently going on. So let's start, let me just go here with a little bit of background. So I'm going to kind of blow through some of these historical slides, but basically for those who aren't aware, the country had over a half a century of military dictatorship and harsh censorship. As you can see here, The New Light of Myanmar is the state-run English language paper. It was dubbed The New Lies of Myanmar by many in the opposition. And the people's desire was something printed on top in every publication prior to the transition that happened starting in 2010. But what's important during this time, they're trying to develop these a strand of independent media outside of state control that had two broad categories, primarily
Recording in progress.
primarily increasingly professional, ethnically unmarked independent media, such as the Irrawaddy, Democratic Voice of Burma, and Mizima, that were publishing in English and Burmese. And then on the other hand, a separate section, sort of sector of ethnic media that were not exclusively, but often along the borders of the country where the ethnic groups were primarily located, primarily in ethnic languages, and later branching out into multiple languages to do outreach. But very much targeted toward ethnic communities, much less well-funded and more vulnerable to violence, both from the military, the primary Burman military, but also any kind of ethnic forces that they displeased, including ethnic government forces. But these ethnic media also increased in number and sophistication prior to the opening that began in the country in 2010 and slowly became recognized as necessary for national reconciliation, but really were still very much marginalized prior to the pandemic in the country. Transition began Okay, is that okay? All right, so basically, transition began in 2010. You're probably well aware the country opened up, easing of sanctions and so on. And really what happened, what this led to was a huge amount of investment and top-down development aid. Myanmar sort of seen as Asia's economic new frontier, lots of money coming in. Unfortunately, the military still played a very key role in the country. 25% of parliamentary seats were controlled by the military, and they controlled powerful ministries. And the transition was widely seen as top-down, ushering in a hybrid regime. What's interesting about that and important in terms of media here is, in addition to the changes that did happen, the liberalization of the independent newspaper sector and end of pre-publication censorship, there was a huge influx of Western donor money using a development framework. A majority of that money went to efforts at the state level to kind of especially to focus on making state media into public service media. So we're talking about a lot of money. While ethnic media and other independent media were not as much a focus of this, and especially ethnic media. Much of the media aid prior to the transition had been happening outside of the country, and once the transition happened, a whole bunch of donors moved in and kind of left the ethnic media kind of to fend for themselves. So, okay, really quickly then, I just want to talk about the 2013 explosion in the telecommunications market. We had the privatization of the sector and a huge amount of foreign direct investment, so that's all of a sudden within the course of a few years, between 2009, SIM cards that cost about $2,000, and then in 2016, SIM cards were about $1, and mobile penetration had reached 85% of the population. So you see this is a very quick transition, which, as you probably are well aware of, led to some of the problems around the Rohingya situation and the direct manipulation of Facebook by the Myanmar military in order to fuel anti-Rohingya sentiment in the country. We had civil society and independent media groups, some of which, not all of which, but some of which were working to counter misinformation and anti-Rohingya hate speech, especially working with Facebook. But we know Facebook was very slow to respond and was manipulated by the Myanmar military to increase the violence against the Rohingya. Unfortunately, as we all know, probably Aung San Suu Kyi's reputation took a hit in the West during this. On the other hand, many Myanmar, especially Burma Buddhists, supported her position in supporting the military or the Tatmadaw in their genocidal campaign against the Rohingya. At this particular point in time, independent media were squeezed between an angry Burma Buddhist public and Western donor pressure. Okay, basically, civil society worked hard to try to decrease the hate speech, introducing cyberbullying campaigns, media literacy campaigns, hate speech, and so on. And yet, the NLD response was not. They did not join in this effort, and in fact, introduced internet blackouts in 9 townships in Rakhine State and Chin State in 2019 that lasted until the coup in early 2020. And those were in areas where there was ongoing military confrontation, but the argument was given that this was, well, in part because of that and also later because of COVID situation. Okay, this definitely affected Aung San Suu Kyi's image, as probably everyone knows. So basically, prior to the pandemic, there was definitely a backlash of repressive measures, even though there had been an opening. Defamation suits were being used regularly by the government. Excuse me. As you can see, there were financial issues, money issues, and rights discourse. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Took a real hit as a result of what happened with the Rohingya. And so it was kind of discredited. Okay, I basically want to, you probably are well aware of this, but the different generations of rights, the first generation, civil and political rights, and the second generation, economic, social, and cultural rights. And specifically, I want to talk about this as they're related to media, because in the media sector, there's long been a focus on civil and political rights, especially in relation to press freedom and freedom of expression, but also a long history of calling for a right to communicate as a fundamental human right. And that just means the ability to have your voice heard. So in the Myanmar situation, you can imagine, I'm not going to go through the history here, but basically, in the whole media sector, there's a huge debate, and has been since the 70s and 80s, on the difference between the free flow of information and the right to communicate. And the right to communicate basically being seen as a group-oriented right to self-determination, and not just access to information, right? Okay, so the reason this is important is because basically when we talk about what happens in terms of aid, and especially media development aid, we see that individual civil and political rights are primarily seen as the main communication-related human rights. And so they're the ones that get focused on issues of press freedom, safety of journalists, and so on. Whereas group-oriented social, economic, and cultural rights, which in relation to media also have to do with self-determination, the right to cultural freedom and expression, of cultural expression, and so on, those kinds of things are generally couched as development issues and not seen as cultural survival or communication issues. And this was especially exacerbated during the transition, when millions of dollars of aid that went into media development were centered on the state, the Myanmar state, in media development efforts, and really, as I mentioned, sidelined ethnic media and the development of ethnic media. Okay, so now quickly to get to the COVID-19 situation. The NLD government, unfortunately, was not particularly sympathetic to the independent media. They prioritized state-run media as essential workers, and used the state-run media as a mouthpiece to critique mainstream media, which became stigmatized. So basically what happened was, after the NLD was elected in 2019, because of the popularity of Aung San Suu Kyi, the state-run media, which had always been kind of the enemy media of the military regime, suddenly became the most trusted media in the country. And what happened was that really problematized things for independent, who were now critical, because that is their role, right? Critical of the regime, but now we're dipping in popularity. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Okay, so the internet blackouts continued. And there was surveillance of the independent media, especially in the ethnic areas. This was framed in terms of national security, was blocking of hundreds of websites during COVID. Many of them were registered and were in ethnic areas. They were independent media in ethnic areas. And basically what that meant was, for the military and the government, there was a blockage of information about ongoing fighting. And then also in terms of COVID, many people could not get information about local conditions, was not able to go out to the rest of the country and to aid agencies. In this situation, ethnic was important in responding and in working with civil society groups to try to address the COVID situation, especially. During this whole situation, there was a serious drop in revenue. Obviously, media needed to work from home. There were staff cuts. Many groups eliminated their print publications and went online to stay afloat. Interestingly enough, though, ethnic media, because they're in those sort of areas of fighting, were less affected by the coup than the major non-marked ethnic media, non-ethnic media that I mentioned before. Okay, a significant investment in online applications, which actually helped then during the coup. Okay, since the coup,
Recording stopped.
You probably are aware of the multiple abuses.
Recording in progress.
Since the coup, so direct attacks definitely on journalists and media houses, the revoking of licenses, raids, warrants, and so on. People being arrested, I'm sure you've heard all of this. Blocking of the internet on a massive scale, and then people's workarounds such as VPNs and other forms of encryption also then becoming illegal. So basically we're seeing a return to the harsh censorship regime of the pre-2010 period, also through the amending of media laws and the elimination or taking control over independent journalist associations that were established during the opening period. And also a direct challenge to human rights discourse, continuing on sort of with that earlier discourse, challenging human rights discourse, and also talking about independent media as fake news and as reliant on Western donor daddy countries. Okay, so the media and civil society response, we've seen a flowering of new creative projects, very interesting new intersectional alliances in the opposition. This is the slide where my hope comes through. What we're seeing is continual, organic, like from the ground up, deconstruction of the military rhetoric, of military propaganda, and increased respect for independent media and independent journalism. An increase in the use of citizen journalists, which I think is important not only because citizen journalists can provide information, but also because this is a way in which the entire country becomes a part, invested in the production and dissemination of accurate information. Okay, the importance of networking, especially with ethnic media and with marginalized groups. This is, oh, sorry. This is really important and new. Sorry, hold on a second. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Also really interesting pattern of, so there's this lawfare going on in which the military is claiming that they're doing things on the basis of law, right? Legal laws, which of course are unjust and which were passed under their regime. But we see people using rights and laws in response to this. In other words, calling on the military, calling them out for this problematic use of lawfare. Also, networking and reliance on networks that were built during previous crises. I mean, the reason I think it's important to understand the history here is because what's happening in Myanmar now is the result of decades of work, right? It's not just a result of what happened during the transition, even prior to that, during the 50 years of military dictatorship. Okay, and we also see digital rights and privacy rights works continuing in efforts to protect activists and journalists. And also, and really important is especially ethnic media gaining recognition, especially when there's such a grand call for a federal union. And this gets to kind of the final point here. There has been a significant change in national consciousness in the country. Nobody any longer is calling for a return to the status quo. There's a call for a new federal democratic system. There's a call for a new federal army. There's a real change in understanding about the ethnic minorities, including their people into this, which this will occur after there's no longer, the common enemy of the military. But it's quite clear that the discourse has made a major shift. And this, for me, is very, very hopeful because suddenly there's an increased awareness of the need for a human rights focus that includes not only individual civil and political rights related to press freedom and freedom of expression, but also communication-related social, economic, and cultural rights, especially the right to communicate, the right to have a platform, and a communication commons that's diversified and includes the voice of everybody. So, obviously these are normative goals, but they are being discussed right now for the first time in the 30 years I've been watching the country in a way that has never happened before. And then I just want to kind of close with the idea that support will be most effective when it's not a state-centric approach to development here, or media, improving the media situation. But when it supports those groups that are actually working right now on the ground to democratize and diversify voices. And this includes increasing access to the right to communicate and to challenge those authoritarian information strategies that the current Myanmar military is using. Those things are all happening organically. So we just have to make sure that we're supporting those folks who are already doing that work. Okay, and that's my presentation. So I'm happy to discuss any of this further in the question and answer session. And I apologize for kind of losing it there a little bit with my voice.
Yes, thank you very much, Lisa, for the wonderful presentations. And also, maybe because of the time there in the United States now, it's evening, right? What time is it now there? No, I can hear your voice again. Mas, speakernya nggak nyala lagi. I'm sorry, Lisa, I still cannot hear your voice, but maybe there's a bit technical problem here.
Oh, there we go. I wasn't able to unmute for a moment, but I'm in San Francisco right now, and it's 6:30 p.m.
Okay, okay. Yes, thank you so much. And now we learned very valuable how the media could actually push changes in the society and also might influence that the people could aware about the human rights. Thank you very much, Lisa. And we're going to move to the second presenter. We have here Ms. Meta Madonna from University of Bayangkara, Jakarta. Ms. Meta, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Meta would like to present her paper on the existence of human rights defender guarantees for media and journalists. Please, Ms. Meta, 20 minutes time is yours.
Okay, I want to share my screen. Good morning, everybody. I am here. I want to use speak English and speak Bahasa Indonesia because my English is not good. So if in here someone to ask me, you can use Bahasa English maybe, and moderator will be translate for me. For the first, I want to presentation about the existence of media for human rights defenders and assurance of journalists and security in the perspective independent journalists. Sorry. Freedom of the press and the activity of journalists with high mobility have been protected by law and law number 44 of 1999, concerning the press, where national press freedom is priority as form of protection for members of the press. However, the fact record the press or media freedom in the country is still facing pressure in the form of restraints, and even attacked by the authorities of parties involved in human rights violation. Until now, in most cases of attack on media office and editor, it is often difficult to prove the motive and perpetrator. However, there are always a common thread and synthesis that can be drawn on in the intimidation and criminalization of media coverage. Pressure in the form of intimidation and provocation to press and company is accompanied by acts of violence against a journalist. The alliance of Indonesia journalists, not the true 2019, there were 43 cases of violence against journalists, 20 physical violence, destruct equipment of data from the 14 case threat of violence or terror in 6 case conviction or criminalization of 5 cases and prohibition and reporting on 4 cases. The reality of the situation and problem above raised equation, among others, what is the role and the form of media participation in human rights defenses? Why do media and journalists need to be involved in human rights defenses? And how to protect journalists who fight for human rights? The purpose of the study was to determine the role and form of participation on the mass media and journalists in its human rights defenders. The following are the protection that the government or state must be provided for company and members of the press. The method, the problem, the study was carried out with the qualitative approach within the framework and constructivistic thinking paradigm, the systematic review, the method used, and effort to redefine, categorize, and trace previous study related on the role of the media and journalists' human rights defense action. Also, equipment with secondary data such as publication and documentation. Discussion several from our model of mass media participation as the defense of human rights can be divided in the perspective of dependent journalism. The role and participation of the mass media in the defense of human rights include: 1. The mass media as reference, namely consideration of decision making in the human rights court. 2. The mass media as literacy on human rights. 3. The mass media as supervisor of the law enforcement process and human rights. And 4. The mass media as an empirics in law enforcement and human rights. Closing. However, media participation in the enforcement of human rights must remain within the corridor of the press, the professionalism, and uphold independent journalists, giving legitimacy and special protection to the mass media does not necessarily make the press go overboard and as advocacy force, let alone justified. Thank you. Maybe that's all. And I apologize if I make a mistake because I'm still learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mehta, for the presentation. It was quite quick, so you take only, I think, more or less 15 minutes. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was about how the role of the media, and or how the actually media can play some roles, and how then the states could protect the human rights journalists via media, and also as well as the human rights defenders. Thank you so much. I was a bit having
You're welcome.
difficulties to hear your voice because of the speaker here, but it's fine. Thank you so much. And we have the third presenter here. I'm not sure if he or she is already joining with us. We do have Mr. Solahuddin Al-Fateh from Universitas Muhammadiyah Malang. Are you with us, Pak Solahuddin? Okay, I don't think that he's joining with us either via Zoom or via here offline. Maybe the next presenter from Mahidol University, Thailand, Miss Kalwarchi Chamodi. Okay, she's not here as well. Maybe we could move on to the question and answer session while we are waiting for the other two presenters. Maybe hear from the audience, or also from the audience participants in Zoom would like to raise questions to the two presenters that we had today. Anyone? Nggak ada ya? I don't see any. Okay, maybe I could ask questions to Mbak Meta. Maybe do you take any case study for your research with regard to the human rights guarantees for the media and journalists? Mbak Meta, are you still with us? Or are you still preparing the
Yes.
Yes. Oh, did you hear the questions? No, it was a question from me actually. Whether or not you take a case study for your in your article, and if yes, maybe what kind of case study, what kind of cases that you took?
I'm the before for the I'm the I'm ex-journalist about 40, and I see very much case when I work for the journalist.
Okay, only one case, or you took more cases maybe than in your article? While waiting for Miss Meta, We have. Oh, okay. Miss Meta answered via chat box that she is actually ex-journalist, and she found that there are so many problems when she did her job or her works. For example, it's provocation in journalism. I think that was the answer from her. There is also questions from Dr. Kramer. There's a questions addressed to Professor Bruton. Professor Bruton, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
I'm here.
great. There is a question from Dr. Kramer from University of Sydney. With your
Mhm.
hope for Myanmar, what do you see as the tipping point that will move us towards a freer media with the current government in place? Also, are citizen reporters uh, facing severe backlash or threats? Thank you so much.
Yes, okay. So thanks for the question. So I would say, first of all, is the second one, citizen reporters, all reporters, anybody who is doing any kind of independent reporting is in danger there for sure. And we really don't know. I mean, we don't know how many of the journalists have left that are actually working or either working with the few outlets that have kind of kowtowed to government pressure and are kind of holding the government line, or at least not questioning it, or they're in hiding or working underground. So yeah, and some of them at extreme levels of danger. Yeah, and that is a serious issue for all media. The tipping point that will move us toward a freer media with the current government in place, I would argue that there isn't really a current government in place in Myanmar, sorry. There's definitely an effort to recognize the NUG. I mean, I suppose you could call the military junta a government in place, but I don't think it has any legitimacy. So in terms of any tipping point toward a freer media with the current situation, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that there will be continued pressure. I don't know what that means in the long term, but clearly, I mean, moving toward a freer media is going to require some significant change in the country. And what we're going to see for a while is an interesting realignment of those media that were previously in exile, who have moved back into exile and have very interesting, because the independent media in the country was largely in exile, or a lot of it was in exile until the opening in 2010. And now even those that has sprang up since 2010, since the opening began, have moved out of the country now, the independent media. So we're talking about Frontier Myanmar, Myanmar Now, those that were sort of newer, more credible media outlets. They will continue to develop in exile. And there are all kinds of different strategies for how they're going to do that. And right now, it's what we're seeing as a real period of realignment and trying to figure out how they're going to do that. So the ones that were in exile before have already pretty strong networks and are back and kind of moving along in those lines. And I think we're kind of back to that situation for a while until there's some change. Sorry, I wish I could tell you more. I wish I had a crystal ball. But the thing for me that's most important is this massive shift in an understanding that the country needs to be more openly multi-ethnic and recognizing of all of the ethnic peoples, and for the first time ever, a real national focus on federalism. I think that's a huge thing. And that will have an impact on media. So I hope that answers your question. Happy to talk further at any point.
Yes, thank you so much. Maybe Dr. Kramer would like to respond to the questions, to the answers from Professor Bruton. Okay, for those. Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Kramer. It's fine. Thank you so much. Okay, are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, there is one. Mas Hanif, please. Could you please also mention your name and to whom your questions are addressed to? Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Professor Bruton, my name is Hanif from the University of Jember. I just want to know, as an Asian people living in Southeast Asia, I think most of us doesn't read mass media in the West. So we just want to know whether is there any difference of reporting after the coup, and for example, like do you see any different kind of substance of the reporting in the mass media in the West about the coup and also the current situation in Myanmar? Or I don't know, because we just don't want to know, and we just don't know, and we want to know about the shifting of like insight from the mass media in the West, as perhaps here in Indonesia, maybe in other Asian countries. We all know that many mass media in the West, they more focus on the current situation, maybe in the situation in North Korea, perhaps in Afghanistan, and in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. As I understand it, you're asking me if the situation in Western media coverage has shifted. Well, honestly, I can't say that I've been studying that, but as a media watcher, actually, that's not entirely true. I am writing a paper right now about the CNN parachute journalism that happened in Myanmar in early April, and also comparing that with the parachute journalism of also Clarissa Ward. In both cases, she's CNN's major international reporter. So I can talk about that a little bit. I mean, one of the things that happened there was, I don't know if you're aware at all of the controversy, but there was a regional controversy in Southeast Asia about CNN's parachute journalism trip into Myanmar. And that was primarily because there were a lot of regional and local journalists that were already covering the information. CNN really wasn't able to get anything new. What they were able to get was a sit-down conversation with Zhang Chun, who's the military spokesperson, but he'd already been making press releases and statements and so on. So there was a really interesting backlash against the CNN parachute journalism trip, sort of kind of critiquing it as a sort of neo-colonial white woman goes in to sort of save the brown people, to very much simplify the argument. Basically, that was one part of the argument. And also what happened was when CNN went in, they endangered people in the marketplace who came up to talk to them. 11 people were arrested. 8 of them were released afterwards, for sure. 3 of them were not sure. There are some rumors that they were beaten, but we're not really sure. But anyway, what's interesting about that is sort of the regional reaction to the sort of CNN parachute trip. And then noting by journalists afterwards that after that trip, there was very little reporting about Myanmar in CNN. Very little. And that continues. So unfortunately, I wish I could say that the American media were on the scene and on the case and following it, but that is not, unfortunately, the way mainstream commercial media in the United States functions, which is hugely problematic. And so, unfortunately, the only real good in-depth reporting we're getting is from more independent sources. But even then, it's minimal. The United States investment in Myanmar is primarily symbolic. And we can talk about that at length if you want, if you're interested. But yeah, I wish I could say more, but I don't see much in terms of in-depth reporting on the Myanmar situation that has any real context or history other than some longer pieces by more investigative outlets.
Mas Hanif, do you would like to comment on that? No? Okay. Are there any more questions from the audience and from the chat? There is no chat here, but maybe I can ask questions to Professor Bruton. I was wondering, I didn't know the situation in Myanmar at this moment. I was wondering when the citizen journalist, it's also like a kind of echoing what Dr. Kramer's questions, that the citizen journalists who receive threats or maybe backlash, or maybe you also mentioned that they were exiled, if I'm not mistaken. Do they, prior to this exilement, do they also receive fair trial, for example, so that at least the government or the lawyer, the advocates over there could also help to retain their rights as a citizen journalist?
I would not say that there's anything approaching any kind of fair trial going on in Myanmar right now.
Okay.
I mean, Myanmar is a state in which lawfare is used. Basically, the government creates laws that it then relies on to oppress any kind of dissent. That's what's happening in Myanmar right now. Yeah, there is no, I mean, journalists are arrested without, I mean, on very bogus, trumped up charges. There's very little predictability in terms of who's going to get arrested, why, what kinds of, I mean, nobody knows. Honestly, it's like a return to the pre-2010 situation in which it's a military dictatorship that are censoring and shutting down media now. I mean, this is not anything. I mean, and the courts are a sham for the most part. They're really, they're seen as administrators of military law, right? They're not seen as arbiters of military law. They're seen as administrators of that law. So basically what the military says is what goes. And unfortunately, that doesn't leave much room, which is why any kind of independent media journalism has to happen in exile or underground. And that's since the coup. I mean, prior to the coup, that was not the situation. There was a 10-year period in between 2010 and 2021 where there was a real opening, flowering of more independent media. And it was during that 10-year period, really, that the new generation, Gen Z, which is kind of the primary mover and shaker of the current opposition to the coup, those people had access because this, I showed you the rapid fire increase in access to social media and Facebook between 2015, around 2015, 2016. Between 2010 and 2016, like 85% of the country suddenly was online. So that period of time, 10 years, where there was opening is what really has driven the young people to say, no, we are not going to go back to a situation prior to the opening. So hopefully, if that wasn't clear, sorry. But that's the situation currently right now. And so what's happening is those media that were operating independently and have refused to stop publishing are now kind of regrouping. Also the donors that did a lot of supporting of the military, of the of the state, and putting millions of dollars into turning the state-run media into public service broadcasting. They're now doing a bunch of soul searching about the fact that they prioritize problematically in terms of their funding. So now there's this window suddenly where donors and media people are really, and civil society people are really rethinking what has to happen in the country. And that's why, I mean, this is a very hopeful moment for me, because there's this real rethinking of what the country should look like, which is really exciting.
Yes, thank you so much for the updating information with regard to our neighbor Myanmar, and also that ASEAN itself at this moment are still having discussion and how should they act with regard to what Myanmar do to their citizens. Maybe also there's another questions from the audience. No? No questions? Oh, yes, I saw one questions. I saw one person who'd like to ask. Mas Herlambang, please.
It's okay. Just short question from me. My name is Herlambang from Gajah Mada University. I would like to ask Professor Lisa Bruton. Since you did research and also publish your work in Myanmar, and as we've seen that in Southeast Asia, we are facing sort of like a digital authoritarianism, and it's really growing in this region. And my question is, what will be a special character looking at the Myanmar compared to other countries in Southeast Asia? Well, I've seen Manila, Indonesia, Thailand are the same. We have cyber defamation, bullying, fake news, and many others. And for Ibu Meta, I would like to know, how do you observe the growing numbers of criminalization of digital journalism, especially referring to the use of information and electronic transaction law. As we've seen that just few days ago, Asrul, one of journalists in Sulawesi, was detained because of his report on corruption. So that's all. Thank you.
Would you like me to respond? I can respond to that.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
So as I understand it, you're asking me about informational authoritarianism, and I'm not exactly sure of the question, but I can give some thoughts on this. I mean, clearly, yes, there's definitely a situation in which a new form of authoritarianism involves the control over information. And I mean, this is really the concept of hegemony in a new kind of digital form, right? The concept that those who tell the stories have the power, right? Is basically the information, the situation that we're dealing with here. And I think, I mean, part of Gramsci's introduction of the concept of hegemony was an understanding that we need to focus on culture, right? In response to kind of a Marxist approach in which we focus really on economics and the market system. And I think that's one thing we can keep in mind here. The fight against informational authoritarianism, of course, we have to pay attention to the digital technologies, the tools, and that kind of thing. But tools are available for both sides here, right? And what we're really talking about is control over culture. So what's really hopeful for me in this moment is, yes, there's this spread of informational authoritarianism, but there's also a hugely hopeful spread of counter actions against it. So we see things like the regional emergence of the Milk Tea Alliance among young people from across the region who are saying, oh, no. This is not going to be our Asia, right? And I think when we have so much of a technologically deterministic focus on the tools and the technologies, we lose the importance of that cultural response. That cultural response is powerful. And for me, that's where I see the hope, both in terms of Myanmar, but also every single one of the countries that we're talking about. And I study three. I study Thailand, Myanmar, and the Philippines, and the United States. And in my sense of things, I mean, that is when we start to really look at those groups that are most marginalized, so focusing on those groups that have not been able to, they've not had the kind of self-determination in the communication commons area, but they're fighting for that. That fight for me is the central fight. So I don't know if that helps answer your question at all, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. Okay, there are no feedback again from Mas Herlambang. Mbak Meta, would like to answer the questions from Mas Herlambang?
Yes, thank you for the question. I will speak in Bahasa Indonesia because my English is not good. Kalau menurut pengalaman saya di media cyber itu, kok sekarang kan banyak terjadi kriminal cyber dikarenakan itu untuk jurnalis online mereka itu tidak menggunakan penyaringan ya, atau tidak melalui ruang redaksi terlebih dahulu, sehingga mereka itu dapat memposting berita secara langsung. Dengan demikian lebih banyak terjadi pemberitaan-pemberitaan yang menyebabkan provokasi karena tidak adanya penyaringan. Mungkin kalau di sini berbeda dengan Profesor Broughton, mungkin dia terkait dengan media framing. Kalau di sini justru karena kebablasan itu, pemberitaan itu langsung diposting ke media, sehingga banyak media-media yang justru memprovokasi karena tidak adanya penyaringan di media itu sendiri. Karena jurnalis sekarang bisa langsung memposting berita di media online. Thank you. Maybe you can to translate in English. Thank you very much.
Hopefully I can translate it correctly, that based on the Mbak Meta experience, that there are many news that are already posted in the online media that cause provocation because there is no a kind of how do you call that, like
gatekeeper maybe?
Sorry?
Gatekeeper.
Sorry, it's not that clear. What did you say? Maybe you can type it in the chat box. Oh, okay. Because there is no gatekeeper, so there is someone that could actually select the news, whether it cause a kind of provocation on the reader or not. Is that correct, Mbak Meta?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the two presenters that have answered the questions. Are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, there is one question over there. Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Hello, Miss Lisa. Good morning. My name is Anissa. Sorry if my English is not friendly. My question is, what if the media were owned by the politician? Does this not affect the neutrality of the news and broadcast from the media? Thank you.
Yeah, it's generally not seen as a good thing for politicians to own media. I'm not, excuse me, exactly sure if you mean in relation to Myanmar or in general. But yeah, no, it's, I mean, of course, there are all kinds of questions about who owns what, and the whole field of the political economy of communication is about that ownership issue and how ownership affects the media content that we see. So yeah, there's a whole field kind of devoted to that question. Yeah, but that's a good question. It's an important question. Who owns what is definitely key to, you know, some indication of why we end up seeing what we see on the media, for sure. And that's why when I call independent media, I'm talking about media that are independent of the state, but also large corporate interests. which I would not say is the mainstream media in the United States. I think that's not, I would not call mainstream, I would not call CNN and other mainstream media independent. So it's a good question, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Bruton. Are there any more questions from the audience?
A very short question, if
Okay.
I may.
Sure,
Professor
Mas
Bruton.
Hanif, please.
I'm not a media specialist. I'm a law and legal scholar. I think in Indonesia and maybe in other countries, there is a common trend that media, as Anissa said, that mainstream media is owned by politicians or maybe corporates. How about your prediction in the near future, whether we are going to have like a bit more free media, as perhaps it perhaps happened like 2 decades ago, or maybe will we experience and having media owned by corporate or maybe politicians, because maybe most of us know that maybe in the USA or maybe in the UK or in other countries, it is very common to have like two media which they stand in the opposite way. Thank you.
Was your questions addressed to Professor Bruton?
So about your prediction, are we going to experience or maybe having a free media which is not owned by corporate or maybe politician in the near future, or are we going to have more politics nuance media?
I mean, if your question is addressed to me, I would just say that as long as media are commercial, whatever interests people, like whatever sells is going to be the bottom line. And so unfortunately, sensationalism sells unless we demand a different kind of media system. I don't think we're going to see it in the future, unfortunately. I think we'll see more fragmentation of the media audience. I would like to see more calls for kind of communication commons and that kind of thing, but I'm not super hopeful. I wish I could say something different, to be honest with you. I think if you really, I think we're gonna, but I think also what's happening right now is journalism is going through a major revolution, and we don't really know what the journalism of the future is gonna look like. So we're kind of in a major transition period here, especially with the advent of social media. So it's a little hard to say, but I don't see the influence of media and money and politics abating in any time soon. I think that's going to continue, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. There is a chat. In the chat box from Mbak Mimin. Maybe this is something that Mbak Meta needs about the standard norma and pengaturan tentang pembela HAM. Maybe I don't know what the chat propose, but Mbak Meta could maybe take a look at this link and might add something on the paper later on. There's a questions from the audience here, please,
Yeah.
Mas.
Thank you, Bu Erna. My name is Muktiana. I have one question to Prof. Lisa Bruton related to the role of media in the future, because in the case of Indonesia now, as example, that the public opinion through social media or citizen has a bigger influence to the law enforcement than the mainstream media, and sometimes even the journalists or media refer to the public opinion to frame the news, and to some extent that law enforcer like police or judge, they prefer to uh, to make opinion or to develop the case based on the social media rather than from the mainstream journalists or media. What do you think related to the relation between democracy and media in the future under the development of social media today? Mungkin Mbak Meta juga bisa memberikan respon. Terima kasih, Bu.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you, Mas Mukti.
go ahead.
Please, Professor Bruton, if you would like to respond on that.
Okay, first of all, I'm not an expert in any way on Indonesia, so I'll need to learn from you about that. But in terms of social media influence, yes, I think we are recognizing more than ever before the dangers of social media, and we've seen Facebook and Twitter and some of the other major platforms kind of coming under increasing pressure and increasing discussion of how we regulate these media. So I think there's increasing recognition that the algorithms of social media, I mean, a lot of research has shown us now the algorithms of social media emphasize those things that are sensational. So whether it's cute puppies or horrific pictures of violence, those are the kinds of things that sell. And again, unfortunately, if we're talking about a media that is primarily commercial and doesn't have a lot of other regulations, is deregulated in the interest only of money making, then we are going to continue to have problems with that. And as far as the law enforcement element of it, I'm not really aware of that. I don't know that I can speak to that. Even in the United States, I'm not really super clear on the relationship between policing and social media content, but I think it's an interesting question that needs some more research. I'd love to know what kinds of things have already been found about those relationships. But yeah, I think the social media, the discussion around the influence of social media, the way it can be manipulated, the way in which algorithms are programmed to emphasize certain kinds of content over others, those are things that are going to continue to be discussed, and not necessarily so. I think we have a huge challenge on our hands when it comes to trying to figure out how to control the worst aspects of, or the worst consequences of social media. It's a kind of a situation that's gotten out of our control, I think, and we need to figure out how we're going to regulate it better.
Maybe then Mbak Meta would like to respond on Pak Mukti questions.
Yeah, thank you. I would to like explain in bahasa Indonesia. Jadi kalau yang sekarang lebih dilihat itu tidak hanya sekedar membangun opini publik, tapi justru lebih dari itu. Jadi media online ini menjadi sebuah media memprovokasi berita, membuat berita tidak berimbang di media online dan memicu konflik, menjustifikasi dan sebagainya. Sementara Dewan Pers itu tidak ada kekuatannya. Jadi nanti pada suatu saat ke depannya atau mulai dari sekarang orang-orang tuh mulai kembali lagi ke media mainstream, itu media yang dipercaya. Terlebih dengan adanya jurnalisme warga semakin membuat suasana pemberitaan di media online itu semakin kredit ya, atau semakin kacau balau. Jadi orang itu tidak ada patokannya untuk media mana yang bisa dipercaya. Masyarakat sendiri jadi bingung gitu ya. Jadi nanti ke depannya akan kembali lagi ke media mainstream. Orang-orang akan percaya lagi dengan media-media mainstream, dampak dari banyaknya pemberitaan media online yang tidak dapat dipercaya. Itu aja, thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Meta. I will try to translate a little bit on the response so that Professor Bruton could also understand the situation in Indonesia with regard to the social media. And at this moment, there are so many hoax or fake news that might be available via social media, and it causes disruption on the on the society, on how this news is actually correct or not, or it is trusted or not. So that because of this chaos, then people try to return to the mainstream media to look for the correct one, the one, the news that are more trusted by the society. Is that correct, Mbak Meta? If I translate it correctly?
Yes. Terkait dengan Dewan Pers juga tidak ada kekuatannya, sehingga masyarakat nanti kembali lagi ke media mainstream. Okay, that's right.
Okay, thank you. So people tends to choose mainstream media at this moment rather than social media, right?
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We still have actually 20 more minutes if there is still some questions that need to be asked to the presenters. Oh yes, Mas Mukti would like to respond on the answers.
Thank you very much. I want to respond the answer or respond from Mbak Meta Madonna. I a little bit disagree about the future of the public, how to make our society more what it's called as choosing back to the mainstream media in order to get more clear news or even I don't know what kind of clear news I mean. That it is almost impossible today for the peoples to disregard the social media, because in terms of the speed and the interaction between the peoples and and how to for example discussing the issue, it will be easier through the social media. And if we only refer, or people only refer to the mainstream media, I think it is not 100% guarantee that they will get what we call as a neutral news or something like that, because even the mainstream media is not truly independent, because they most of Indonesian media has a relationship with the elite politics, and also we call as apa itu namanya, not company, 10% rich people in Indonesia, or oligarch. Yeah, oligarch, they has better access to the mainstream media. For example, how they can influence the news, and also they can advertise, for example, their company, their political views, so on and so forth. It will be different if we use like social media to make balance, to make a balance, to get the factual news rather than the framed news from the media. Yeah, this is my opinion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mas Mukti. Mbak Meta, would you like to respond on Mas Mukti bit of disagreement to you?
Oke, thank you. Jadi emang betul ya, dengan adanya banyaknya jurnalisme warga atau media online itu akan ada pemberitaan yang berdasarkan fakta. Di sisi lain, media mainstream juga beritanya pada saat ini tidak berimbang dan memprovokasi, terlebih jika pemberitaan politik misalnya dia ke salah satu pihak aja. Tapi jika ingin media mainstream tetap dipercaya oleh masyarakat, makanya itu dia harus menegakkan peraturannya itu independen dan menggunakan haknya sesuai dengan peraturan perundang-undangan yang ada. Nah, dikembalikan lagi seperti itu jika dia ingin dipercaya lagi oleh si pendengar pembacanya dan tidak ditinggalkan oleh si pendengarnya. Jadi kita ini posisinya serba dilema. Di sisi lain kita dengan adanya jurnalisme warga, media online secara terbuka, di sisi lain kita tahu kenyataannya. Tapi di sisi lain juga kita jadi kebablasan apa yang seharusnya tidak ditayangkan atau tidak dituliskan di media sosial malah dibuka secara luas dan itu juga kadang tidak berimbang. Tapi di sisi lain kita tidak percaya dengan media mainstream. Nah, jalan satu-satunya kita harus media mainstream harus kembali lagi ke habitatnya awal, itu independen dan menerapkan kode etik jurnalistik gitu, jika tidak ingin ditinggalkan oleh si pembaca atau pendengarnya. Mungkin itu aja, terima kasih. Thank you.
Anyone could help me to translate because Mbak Meta speak very fast. I just get a bit at the end of the statement that the mainstream media should return to their habitat so that they could provide the readers with a really good news, so that the trust of the people could come back, and then they could. They would like to read again the mainstream media rather than depend on the social media. I think that's the point of Mbak Meta response, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Mbak Meta? Okay, Mbak Meta, is that correct? The one that I translated for the
Yes,
okay,
it's correct. Thank you.
yes, thank you so much. I was wondering maybe what actually we can do to educate people, so that people will not really depend on social media, so that they still can use social media, because at this moment, as Mas Mukti said, that it is impossible not to use social media, to get your reputation, or to get your, even for us as academics, we could use social media to disseminate our research, for example. But then how we educate this society, this community, to have this kind of illiteration, illiteracy, so that they will be illiterate, I think, if I'm not mistaken, so that they can open their mind, not only to depend on the social media. Maybe that is something that we can do to reduce this kind of distraction in the media, so that the media could also play a role in disseminating a positive news to the society. Maybe Professor Bruton would like to respond to that.
Okay, yeah, I can say that I think we already have organic responses to the problems emerging. I mean, there are many, many media literacy programs that have been being developed across regionally, but also in the individual countries by civil society groups across the spectrum. And I think quite appropriately in response to specific issues. I mean, if you want to understand kind of what the most effective or most kind of active, engaged groups are, you need to kind of look at those who are most marginalized by social media discourse. And those are the ones that are fighting. Those are the groups that are fighting to maintain, again, it's this idea of self-determination and the ability to have a say and be part of a communications commons that, respects your representation, right? So those groups that aren't getting that are the ones that are fighting most for it, right? So we have in the Myanmar situation, I can talk about, those groups that were really working to fight against the genocide against the Rohingya were the ones that were really the loudest in calling Facebook to account for the problems in that situation, right? And those are the groups again. I think if we looked at the various street protests that have broken out across the region in the past couple of years, we see a real merging of intersectional alliances occurring between those groups that have been most marginalized. So we see LGBTQ presence very, very strong, right? And other people who, so that's really where we should take our cue. If we want to help, we need to kind of support those groups that are already working to challenge these kind of hate speech campaigns and so on. And those groups do exist. It's not like, and there's a huge investment in fact checking and media literacy that's going on, and all of that I think is very hopeful and can be supportive. And also I think it's not even necessarily a matter of, this is also happening organically. Like if you look at some of the Twitter discourse around the Myanmar situation, there's an organic deconstruction of propaganda happening among young people. This is hopeful, right? And should be supported. So I think those things are already happening. And I'm hopeful for those kinds of movements.
Thank you, Professor Bruton. Mbak Meta, maybe last response? If you wish, I mean.
I'm sorry, I'm not understand with your question.
Mungkin, I'm sorry, Professor Bruton, I speak in Indonesian to explain to Mbak Meta. Mungkin Mbak Meta bisa merespon yang berkaitan dengan sebetulnya bagaimana sih kita bisa untuk memberikan pendidikan kepada komunitas, kepada masyarakat begitu ya, untuk mereka tidak tergantung dengan berita di sosial media, tapi mereka kemudian bisa menjadi lebih mempunyai literasi begitu, tidak bergantung kepada sosial media, tapi juga kemudian melakukan ya small research atau cross checking terhadap berita-berita yang beredar di sosial media dan kemudian mencoba menggali informasi yang benar. Mungkin ada yang bisa kita lakukan sebagai mungkin academics or researcher. Silakan.
Thank you. Kalau kita di akademik kan ada tridharma, misalnya tridharma untuk perguruan tinggi, misalnya dosen-dosen untuk melakukan pengabdian kepada masyarakat. Nah, kita bisa melakukan literasi media, jadi mengedukasi masyarakat bagaimana cara melihat berita di media online, cross checknya seperti apa, dan bisa tahu itu berita hoax atau memprovokasi atau tidak, gitu seperti itu. Dan ini mungkin tidak hanya dari satu universitas, tapi mungkin di semua universitas di Indonesia bisa melakukan hal itu. Jadi semua orang diedukasi, masyarakat diedukasi. Jadi dalam menerima pemberitaan dia bisa lebih bijak dan tidak mudah terprovokasi. Kan selama ini konflik yang terjadi di Indonesia karena banyaknya pemberitaan yang memprovokasi dan masyarakatnya belum dikasih literasi media seperti itu. Terima kasih.
Yes, thank you so much, Mbak Meta. So what Mbak Meta said is that as an academic, we can use one of the tasks that we have. So we have Tridharma perguruan tinggi. We have 3 tasks as academics. One of them is to give education to the society, so that this can be used to try to provide an education or to change people's mind on the way how they see news in social media. I think that's the translation ya, Mbak Meta ya?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there are no more questions. Oh, there are two questions. Wow. Okay, we still have 8 more minutes, so I hope the question would be fast. Yes, thank you. Please.
Thank you. My name is David. I'm from Manado Legal Aid Institute. I do agree with Bang Mukti has said before that it's not about the media mainstream or what media we accord to, but based on the human rights, it's about the free speech itself, the guarantee of the free speech, whatever the tools the media, the people use. It's not about the media mainstream or what media, because nowadays our media mainstream is not quite a pro-democracy news. They inform to people, and it tends to pro to the government. And so on. I would like to ask to Professor Bruton, I think you have enough knowledge about Indonesian media situations based on the previous discussion. So I would like to ask your opinion according to your studies at Myanmar, whether the Indonesian media situation is quite similar to Myanmar situation. Is it a similar pattern happenings in Indonesia that could possibly become the similar situation in Myanmar? I hope your opinion will be the learning for us, example for us, whether the Indonesian situation will be getting worse, maybe matched to what happens in Myanmar, or it is not similar at all. Thank you.
Maybe next questions directly, Mas Herlambang.
Thank you. This is not question, but I would like to add Ibu Meta for responding Lisa. How to respond about the how the community can respond, especially with the very flood fake news and many others. First, we need to. I mean the National Human Rights Commission already set up the SNP, a standard norm and regulation for free expression. And I think the task of university can contribute in promoting this in order to defend free expression. This is also important step in promoting free expression. And second one, we do sort of like hand in hand with the journalist community by, for instance, like introducing digital literacy with the community, even with journalists, or even with academia. This is also important to to be aware with the information, not part of the fake news community. And the third one, we are facing cyber troops nowadays. It's really organized and really massive in distributing fake news, even making the truth is insignificant. Therefore, we try to promote the importance of data protection right now. So these are part of the important steps in promoting literacy among us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Bruton, maybe would like to respond?
Yeah, I really wish I could answer the question about Indonesian media and comparing it with Myanmar, but I just don't want to say something I really don't know enough about. I mean, I really don't know enough about Indonesian media. I want to pretend that I do. As far as the cyber troops, yes, this is a concerning thing across the region, right? It's sort of a race between those who are hacking for the government side or the authoritarian side, I suppose we could say, and those who are hacking or working kind of to protect digital security and digital rights. And that seems to be a very, very important struggle right now. But I do want to say that I think I have at least observed, I mean, I don't want to put too rosy a picture on this, but I do think that the more that people are aware, I guess in Myanmar's case, we have a situation, right, where people were suddenly, after the coup, forced to very quickly learn about digital security, even though there had been trainings going on for a long time, right? Those trainings suddenly became very important, and people understood the need for that. And so again, I think if we want to understand kind of the most advanced, the most sophisticated responses, we need to look at those who are affected most by the problem. right? So who is it that are being targeted most severely by the cyber troops that we're looking at? And those folks are the ones that are responding and, in my view, should be supported. So, yeah, this is going to continue. This kind of cyber warfare is kind of now where we're seeing this struggle over informational authoritarianism. Like, who's going to control the story, right? So yeah, that's really important. But again, like, I'm not the expert on this. There are people on the ground. You know, those of you in the room there know, probably some of you know this better than me. Like, what is actually, you know, what in terms of the tools and how to respond to the tools. But I have real faith that, you know, the struggle will go on, and it will be, again, culture will be important here too. You know, and even humor, you know, the ability to deconstruct government propaganda is powerful and can be funny. And so that's a source of strength. I think that not a lot of academics and even advocates necessarily pay attention to, that we might want to pay more attention to. I don't know if that helps at all or makes things clearer or cloudier. I'm not sure.
Yes, I was connected with the Zoom at this moment, so I'm so sorry with the connection here. But you can still hear my voice. Maybe Mbak Meta would like to respond, but it was only like a kind of a feedback for your research from Mas Herlambang. Would you like to respond or no, Mbak Meta?
I just want to respond for the question number 2. I agree with that. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation from the two presenters. We learned so much with regard to the condition and how the role of the media in shaping or maybe how they influence human rights in Myanmar, especially with the two crises that are already presented by Professor Bruton, and also how the human rights defenders for media and journalists in Indonesia. Thank you so much for the two of you, and also for the participants that actively discuss this really important issue at this moment. Again, thank you so much. I am Erna Kusumawati. Thank you so much, and my apology if there is some inconvenience happening in our first hybrid session conference. Thank you, Professor Bruton, and thank you, Mbak Madonna. Please give us a round of applause to the two presenters.
Excuse me, make a picture. Can make
okay.
a picture.
Okay, yes.
Because I also can join with Prof. Bruton in here.
Okay, sure, yes. Do you would you like to take a picture and then you count for us, Mbak Mata?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, is it done?
Thank you, Prof. Bruton.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a great day, Professor Bruton. Oh, have a great evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, ini nanti ada break 10 menit, sekarang mungkin tinggal 7 menit, silahkan mungkin, ada break di bawah, mungkin ada coffee or tea ya Mas? Ada coffee or tea and some little snack and that you can take, thank you, see you again in plenary.
Then next, yeah. Please next. Hello. Okay, this is the pattern of action done by the government or apparatus institution on forestry sector, for instance, land grabbing, expulsions, borders of evictions, destruction of indigenous or religious rights, employment, CSR, and also partnership between what we call it big companies with small enterprises from the people. Neglect of indigenous or local rights, trade and criminalization. Trade and criminalization is the new trend. In many cases, almost the activists of people activists, I mean, is also treated by the state apparatus, police, or other institutions. Next. On mining also, by including pollution, environmental damage, sabotage of land community, criminalization of local communities. So criminalization come again here. Again, next. Infrastructure sector. We know that in Jokowi era, infrastructure is accelerations very high, but there are some issues come to Komnas HAM. Unprocedural land acquisition, expropriation of land without compensation, problem with compensation. Sometimes there is none of compensations given to the people, or inappropriate appraisal. Again, next. Hello? State-owned asset sector, or BMN, we call it in Indonesia BMN, barang milik negara, ya. Asset control, ya, including police, TNI, or Indonesian Army, local government, land tenure, order to evict people from their homes, eviction, access to their residence, and court-ordered arbitrary executions. Next. Now, this is the data of area or provinces, regarding the complaint come to Komnas HAM. The biggest one is DKI Jakarta, 18 cases. Oh, not Sumatra, my province, my hometown, and then Jakarta. Riau provinces, West Java also 18 cases on East Java, on plantation sector, for instance, and in Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Papua, mostly the issue of plantation, forestry sectors, and mining. Next, the state actor, of course, not only state actor but also non-state actor. State actors is central government, relating to the regulation that they made, law or something else. Local government also, Indonesian Army and police, judiciary institution. There are some problems also because of the institution made wrong execution or punished. BUMN or BUMD, state-owned price. Non-state actors also big, corporation or private. But in our data, if we compare state actors, cases made by state actors and non-state actors, state actors is bigger. Again, I say that this is not really objective or factual. Probably some cases doesn't come to Komnas HAM. This is just the data that we receive from the people who complain the cases to Komnas HAM. Okay, next. The issue is lack of transparency, supervision, lack of absorption, legal uncertainty, territorial dispute or concession issues, administrative government failures, and something else. Next. So we relate all these issues to the development paradigm that relies on the extraction and exploitation of agrarian sources. I think many NGOs like Walhi Jatams already raised this campaign, raised this issue to their national campaign or international campaign. Different point of view and perspective between people, society, and of course state actor and non-state actors. Claim of state property rights. There is no legal framework for resolving underlying problems. Large-scale infrastructure development. And there is also no official until now. There are task force already formed by the president. The chair is KSP, Pak Muldoko, but I think it's not really formal and strong institution to handle resolving the issue of agrarian conflict. Not really comprehensive. We need the comprehensive institution for that. Next, I think I jump up to the. Yeah, this is already explained. Again, next. The impact of agrarian conflict to the people, of course. Direct impact is eviction, exclusion, and social marginalization. And of course, it is relating also to the issue of structural pauperization, loss of land ownership, loss of income, criminalization, intimidation, social issues, and horizontal conflict, sometimes not only between aparat with the people, but sometimes people with the people. One group of people with another group of people. Pollution, of course. The degradation of ecology situation. And degradation, other issue, I think, indirect impact, as a direct indirect impact to people and to the community. Next. If we see what kind of rights violated by the agrarian conflict, there are so many. Right to a sense of security, right to ownership, right to security, right to justice, of course, right to water, right to work, right to life, even, and some other human rights dimension. Next. Role of the state I already explained before. Obligation to respect, obligation to protect, obligation to fulfill. Next, because I only have a very small. Next, Komnas HAM mandate, I think, already. So there are some effort that Komnas HAM already done before. One is with the activists or civil society, university scholars, and some other intellectuals. We already proposed before. What we call it as a KNUPKA. That's a National Commission for the Resolution of Agrarian Conflict. But until now, it's not yet formed by the Indonesian government. We still propose this strong and official institution. Then next, we are still advocating this. The duty of KNUPKA, if it is formed by the government, is to registering, verifying, and binding cases, and some others. Also facilitating conflict resolution, drafting statutory, reviewing the regulation, law, and others. Next, I think you may read these complete papers after this. And preparing the agrarian reform bill. But now we even meet with another law, like omnibus law. Next, mediation, inquiry, research, and study. Of course, in Komnas HAM, as mandate based on national law on human rights, one of our mandate is to do mediation. There are 100 cases of land or agrarian conflict already mediated by Komnas HAM. Some big cases like International Airport in Yogyakarta, yeah, this is also mediated by Komnas HAM. Now we are still mediating Mandalika issues. This is also serious issue because mentioned by the special rapporteur of human rights from UN. And finally, our team already went there and discussed with many parties, including the people. Yeah. And we do mediation. Inquiry, I think Ibu Sandra can explain more, because one of the serious and very comprehensive inquiry already done by Komnas HAM is National Inquiry on Indigenous People Rights. Research, of course, we have research. And another one, next, yeah. National National Inquiry or National Investigation. We have also special unit to do investigation if the cases come to Komnas HAM, and then it cannot be brought to mediation unit, for instance, and then we send our team to do investigation, and after that we come up with recommendation to all parties related to the conflict or the issues. Next. We have also a special unit. This is a business and human rights working group. What is the truly meaning of business and human rights? According to the national conventional understanding of human rights violations are done by state. But we know also that sometimes it is also done by private, by non-state actors. Yeah. But of course, in this case, we still see that state failure to protect, fail to respect, and fail also to fulfill human rights issue to the people. So we have a special team on this, and we have a coordination also with Indonesian government, because they are the leading sector for business and human rights issue, and some civil society. Next. Next, 1 minute. Recommendation. Based on the above mentioned overall analysis in the context of accelerating agrarian conflict resolution in the context of human rights-based agrarian reform, Komnas HAM urges the President of Republic Indonesia to formulate and realign the concept of agrarian reform so that it encompasses more than just the certification, like they did now, of community-owned land as part of public services, as well as the allocation and distribution of forestry land solely for the benefit of the people. Next. Accelerate public access to reserved land for agrarian reform through explicit arrangements, increasing the coordination and role of institutions that have dealt with agrarian conflict. Next. Evaluating the role of Ministry of evaluating the role of Ministry and Environment and Forestry, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Ministry of Agrarian and Spatial Planning, BPN ATR, and also other institution or regulation related to the issue of agrarian. Next. If the evaluation results show that the ministry institution is not consistently implementing agrarian reform, so we need to consider forming a national commission for resolution of agrarian conflict, KNUCA, that I already mentioned before. In the context of resolving agrarian conflict in Indonesia, establishing a joint desk between Komnas HAM, Indonesian Ombudsman also, Indonesian Ministry of Agrarian Affairs and Spatial Planning, Presidential Staff Office, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Corruption and Eradication Commission, especially for mining issues, KPK, and other relevant organizations. I think this is all the presentation. The complete presentation, PowerPoint, and also the narrative one, I will give it to the committee of international conference and can be distributed to all participants. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Ahmad Taufan Damanik, share about the key initiatives carried by National Human Rights Commission. And I saw in his last presentation, especially many slides talking about recommendations. Of course, I have question, how do you see the effectiveness of that recommendation? But this is later, yeah. We continue with Ibu Sandra. Please, time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Herlambang, Pak Doktor. Good morning, colleague and friends, Pak Taufan, Pak Hanif, and friends from Sepaham and all other participants. Allow me to use PowerPoint also, Pak Herlambang. Can I share screen? Yeah. So, a disclaimer first, because this presentation is not only based on my work at Komnas HAM, but it's also related to the earlier works. So, I think it began in late 80s, yeah? Okay, hope it works. Yeah. It's already? It's supposed to be the full screen, but not full screen. Anyway, thank you. The title of this presentation is Environmental Rights in Indonesia, from Legal Rights to Constitutional Rights. I'm sorry for choosing a theme which is not directly related to the theme of the conference. However, if we learn about this pandemic, I think no doubt that one of the serious pandemic happened because of the environmental destruction, because of the global crisis and the imbalance of the nature at this moment. I think there's been a lot of reference on this. So there is the link, at least something related to the environmental situation. Friends and colleagues, in October 8, 2021, this year, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, I don't know how to, is it Bachelet, called on states to take bold actions to give prompt and real effect to the right to a healthy environment following a UN Human Rights Council landmark decision. The Human Rights Council on that day recognized for the first time that having a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is indeed a human right in its resolution 48-13. So UN only agree this year, while Indonesia already has it in 1998. So we are much more advanced than the UN. Ini nggak sejalan. I think it's not share screen. I'm using ini sih share screen. Tapi di situnya nggak gerak. Excuse us for the technical problems. Makasih Mas. Memang anak muda lebih canggih. Era kolonial kita. Okay. How do I get the information, the analysis, and the conclusion? I would say this is through my prolonged involvement in environmental and human rights movement, and also work at Komnas HAM. The involvement with the human rights and environmental movement began in 1986. That's the period where the merging of the human rights and environmental movement in Indonesia, and I've been working with Komnas HAM since 2012. And so the research methodology, if I want to say, it's participation observation, and I also use interviews because I interviews with some of the key person whom I know knows better than me on some of the issues, and also normative and literature reviews. It began when I started to write about the strategic role of late Abdul Hakim Garuda Nusantara, former chairperson of Komnas HAM, who is also the founder and the first director of LSAM, who was also the chair of while he apa namanya dulu ya, like plenary, no steering committee. So he was the board of WALHI from 1986 to 89. So he was the key person behind the landmark lawsuit on Indorayon case. Yeah. So, and I shared part of this finding at ICEL's webinar on Hukum Lingkungan dari Masa ke Masa in July this year, 2021. Which also together with Prof. Emil Salim and Mas Ahmad Santosa. So there was some confirmation on these issues. So let me begin in refreshing our memory about the environmental and human rights law development in Indonesia. As you know, the first environmental law enacted in Indonesia was the law number 4 of 1982. It was influenced very much by the Stockholm Declaration, which was attended by Professor Emil Salim himself and some other Indonesian scholars. Pak Emil Salim at that time was the Minister for Bappenas, yeah, Perencanaan. And he was, I don't know how did he make it, but he convinced Pak Suharto, President Suharto, to have this law. I think that was like a global trend in many countries where a lot of countries have the environmental law at that time. In 1997, the law was revised to law number 23 of 1997, and the name was not Pokok-Pokok Pengelolaan Lingkungan Hidup again, but it became just Environmental Management Law. That was the period. And then in 1998, the MPR has the decree number 17 on human rights. And what interesting is on this top MPR number 17, there's already article recognizing environmental right, which is a very interesting findings. And this People's Assembly decree or TAP MPR became one of the main source for the law number 39 of 1999. So the environmental right again brought to the environment, to the new human rights law in 1999. And the interesting point, the article on environmental law is part of the section on hak hidup, right to live, which is a fundamental rights. So later on in 2000, the Second Amendment of our Constitution included chapter on human rights, yeah, Article 28, and it was elaborated again environmental right included. Later in 2009, we have the environmental law revised and became law number 32 of 2009 on environmental protection and management. And the first paragraph of the consideration explicitly mentioned that environmental right is human right. So this is an interesting development. So I try to look what are the factors, some of the influencing factors. In 1982, environmental law enacted in Indonesia recognized the rights of every person of a good and healthy environment and the right to participate in environmental management. So in 1988, the NGO challenged it by having the lawsuit, gugatan, one of the first lawsuit on Indo-Rayon case, where Pak Tovan and I, that's where I know Pak Tovan. And at that time, the court reject the gugatan, but then they recognize the legal standing of WALHI and the legal standing of environmental NGOs to stand on behalf of the environment. So if you know the theory of should three have a standing, that is the argument that was used. And that was in 1989, the court decision was made. And this is the interesting part of the development of human right, environmental right as human right, because that is where significant participation of human right lawyers on environmental issues. In 1997, the second law enacted, or the revision of the law on environment took place, and it recognized explicitly the role of NGOs, because in the law number 4, it was not mentioned directly. The article that was used is on participation, people participation, but not on NGO. On the law number 23 of 1997, the NGO is explicitly recognized. And at this stage, NGO and academic assisted the Minister of Environment drafting team. In 1998, the People Assembly decree on number 17 on human rights included the right to a good and healthy environment. How can the human right decree included environmental rights? I tried to interview some of the parliament members at that time, and some of the indicators are the role of environmental and human rights NGO who assisted the member of parliament at that time. I may be wrong, but I haven't found other evidence. So the next was the 1999 when the law on 39 of human right enacted, which included the right to a good and healthy environment. So 1999, if I remember correctly, was more euphoria of reformasi. Yeah. So you get at that time the role of late Cak Munir and some other human rights activists, and that continue. In the Constitution, it's also included, and this is the role of Koalisi Konstitusi Baru, which consists of academic and NGOs. Academics was more HTN at that time, dosen-dosen HTN like Prof. Saldi and some others. But for environmental, I think it was most probably is from WALHI, the input on environmental rights, WALHI and ICEL. So that was the process that I saw. What are the influencing factors and implication to environmental right as human right? Well, definitely the global trends, the Stockholm Declaration has very influential factors, and a number of progressive government officials and member of parliament. At that time, Professor Emil Salim was very progressive for that period, and he's still progressive until now. And we have also late Prof. Kusnadi, who involved, and also Otto Sumarwoto, Prof. Otto Sumarwoto from Pajajaran University. He was also mentioned in some documents. And for the parliament, I heard Ibu Falina, Pak Lukman, Hakim, and some others that are very open with NGOs. And at that time also, we face deteriorating environmental problems. More open, more data about environmental problem, forest fire everywhere. And the other influencing factor is the merging of environmental and human rights movement in late 80s, and also a broader democratization movement in late 90s. And more important is substantive people participation in lawmaking process was facilitated, which is imagine at that time compared to the process of omnibus law. So yes, this is already conclusion, Mas Ram. The inclusion of environmental right to human rights law and the 1945 Constitution considered as a progressive development of the laws in Indonesia, compare like UN and many other countries. So UN struggling to include environmental right since 2011 when they start appointed an independent expert on human rights and environment, which then evolved into special rapporteur on the right on human rights and environment. But then only this year they declared the linkage between environmental rights and human rights. The third issue is about the people participation in lawmaking process have proven to be to have a positive impact on the substance of the law that is produced. And then the integration of environmental rights as constitutional and human rights helps the government and the citizen in expanding the means to solve environmental problems. The Ministry of Environment, for example, at this time mentioned human rights in many of their documents. Yeah. In reality, it's quite, no, there are some progress movement, but there are some stagnancies. But for example, on the issues of conservation, the Director General explicitly say there are 10 new principles, 10 new way for conservation. The first one is about human rights. So there is already emerging on human rights into the environmental management. How about the impact to the protection and fulfillment of a good, healthy environment? I think this is need to be further researched. We have to really look on whether it really have helped the environment and whether it really also helped the right of the people. Thank you. I hope I made it clear. And I would say this is maybe one of the first academic things that I've joined since some years. Thank you, Pak Erlambang.
Thank you, Ibu Sandra Muniaga, for presenting about the, environmental as human rights. And as we've seen that actually really closely related the issue of environmental rights to human rights, and even right now in The Hague, yeah, there have been vehement debates on ecocide. This is connection between environmental issues and sort of like crimes against humanity as a impact of environmental destruction. Okay, So we have around 10-15 minutes for Q&A. If any participants from the floors or from Zoom, please introduce yourself and give your question. Ibu I, oh no, I just try to interpret your gesture, but wrongly. Okay, okay, there are two. Oh yeah, oh it's correct. Okay, please.
Mbak Sandra, and then Pak Taufan ya. I do teach special criminal law and forestry crime, and then environmental crimes. So I think you mentioned before we do have a very important law, and then it's quite good, and then even better than the UN's framework, right? In some issues. But it is, what do you think about the implementation? Is because just recently, for example, it's very difficult to bring the corporate, to the court with regard to the forest crimes and other environmental crimes. So even though we do have like discussion with the police, and the GAKUM has already understand, and then we need to bring it into the court. But the prosecutor seems that very reluctant to do so. So there is a very different layers of the obstacles when we bring the court, yes. When we bring these corporations, into the court in order to implement the good law. So how do you think this need to be enhanced, and then what kind of monitoring that also need to do in order to analyzing the practicality, the practice of the law, because it is very difficult.
Okay.
I do understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you pass the microphone to Ibu Jacqueline? We collect the question first.
Thank you for your insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it. As we know that in many developing countries, including Indonesia, the right of land users are not properly secured. Much of the land is formally owned by the state, as we know, and the land user have no properly titles of the land they cultivate, and in many cases too, the complex combination of the property rights and the users right result in the situation in which those who cultivate the land do not own it. So in this situation, result the legal uncertainty put for the landowner and the land users. So in many cases that we found in several areas of Indonesia, they even don't have access to justice. In many cases, they always fail to get their rights. And when we find that, for instance, the government has already have agreement with a big corporate or even a foreign investor, sometimes the land user or the land owner just give up their right. And my question is, when the Komnas HAM tried to mediate the conflict between the land users, landowner, and corporate, we know that their position is not balanced. Their position is, it's just not equal. So how mediation can give full justice to the land users or landowner if their position itself is unequal? So, so this is my question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ibu Jacqueline. It's about asymmetry power. The next one, the last.
Hello, I am Aisha from Religious Studies. Maybe I layperson in this topic, but I want to ask where is the position of Komnas HAM when in protecting human rights? When, as you mentioned before, that many violation of commit by the state. I'm repeat. Where is the position of Komnas HAM
Yeah.
in the protecting human rights when, as you mentioned before, that the state who committed to violation of the right, people right?
Okay, contradictory.
Yeah, because I see from your presentation, your position is so dilemmatic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will ask Pak Taufan to answer the second questions and the third. Yeah.
I would like to answer comprehensively and trying to give explanation, especially relating to the position and the mandate of Komnas HAM. As I said, we have 100 cases come to Komnas HAM, but we cannot face it. Solve the cases one by one. We just selected some big cases or strategic cases. For instance, in North Sumatra, we collect some cases. Those who come to Komnas HAM in one, what we call it as one bag of cases. Cases, not one case, but cases. For instance, about one private company in Komnas HAM. Bu Sandra already mentioned Inti Indo Rayon. Now change the name to Toba Public Study. There are many cases of the people, different community, various community come to Komnas HAM, and then we collect it in one big case against Toba Public Study. Some other cases, for instance, in other part of North Sumatra, against the state-owned plantation, PTPN. Let's say PTPN number 2 or PTPN number 3 or 4. So we collect, and then we trying to solve the problems collectively by inviting all the ministry or institution who has a responsibility to solve the problem. Komnas HAM cannot decide it by ourselves. We have to coordinate with all of them. For instance, to the Ministry of BUMN, because the final decision where the land give it to the people who complain of that land or not is the Ministry of BUMN, even sometimes to the President of Indonesia. So Komnas HAM cannot decide it, but we propose and we encourage the ministry and also the President of Indonesia to receive our proposal. Our position, of course, we have to protect the people rights, the land rights of people, or agrarian rights of the people. It is water rights or ecological rights or land rights or also other. But of course, it is correct. Yeah. It is not the issue of legal uncertainty, but also the issue of asymmetry power relation between people and state. You know, some people already they have their own rights, for instance, even though this is sometimes we call it as historical rights, because historically they already occupied, live there, work there, and use the land. But finally, one state corporation or private corporation take it out by saying they have HGU, legal status, and then they fail. They lost the land. This is asymmetric power, and also, of course, this is related to the construction of our regulation, our law. The best law that we have on agrarian is only basic agrarian law, number 1960, Undang-Undang Pokok Agraria. But the next national law, like environment law or law on mining, for instance, even the last one, the latest one is omnibus law. I think the position of people is very weak there. The position of land rights of the people, agrarian rights of people is very weak. So we need also to propose reformation of the law to the government. or to the lawmaker. But it's not difficult. It's not easy. Yeah? Even when we, as a Komnas HAM, make a declaration that we reject the national law on omnibus, for example, omnibus, yeah? We get so many political pressure on that, even to our budget. Yeah? So there are also political problem where the democratic situation is not still not 100% access. Yeah? So that's why people are still in the position of discriminated or marginalized. The other one is the impartiality of legal apparatus. Not only the police, but also the judges, the court. There are some cases that we come to Komnas HAM. We see that, we analyze that the problem is the impartiality of the judges, the impartiality of the police also. Very few cases police stand up in the conflict as impartial legal apparatus. Mostly they tend to protect or to support the capital. Either this is private capital or state-owned capital. So this is the other issue that we have to recommend to encourage the police and other legal legal enforcement institution to do more impartial in implementing the law, regulation. But the basic issue is about the regulation and law, because it's not really supported the people rights, the land rights of people, agrarian rights of the people, but tends to support the capital. That's another issue that we have to do also political reformation on that. Not only legal, but also political reformation through our political party, through the parliament, and of course the university, intellectual scholars, in order to have really truly reformative political system. Thank you. This is my answer.
Thank you very much for comprehensive answer. Since we have running out the time, but I'm pretty sure you can answer effectively to to Ibu Iyi, and also one question in the Zoom, please.
Thank you. Mbak Yi, we can discuss outside after the session. No, anyway, on the criminal cases, yes, there are some problems, but actually I'm involved with some of the cases for the local and indigenous people, where the article on the right of indigenous people and also about the exception for burning the land can help them, like the farmers in Kalimantan. So there is always two sides. But as I mentioned earlier, the scope of my presentation is merely on the lawmaking process and the merging of environmental right into the human right regime. But I fully agree that it is important to look on the real substantive impact on the reality. So that is my answer. And second is on the chat from Dita. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us that Komnas HAM has produced standar norma pengaturan, or apa terjemahannya? No, on human rights defenders and also on land and natural resources. So the human rights defenders is already available on the website, but on the land is still on finalization process. Yes, there is some problems with the implementation of Article 66 of law on environmental protection and management, because it doesn't state it directly that it will regulate it in implementing regulation. So the minister keep questioning how should we proceed, because the law does not directly mandate it or appoint the minister to develop an implementing regulation. However, it's been a discussion to have circular and other things, and the important is how can we have the public interest lawyers to understand the issues well, because some of the articles in this law is quite progressive. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ibu Sandra Moniaga. I think we have to end these sessions since I apologize for excess the over the time, around 10 minutes, but I'm pretty sure our session is really a good conversation or good sharing for us, especially looking at the issue of land and environmental rights. I have no specific conclusion, but still curious with the answer of effectivity of the Komnas HAM recommendations, and also how do you deal with the very powerful state or corporations in making the situation worse at ground, especially in the issue of land and also environmental issues. Yes, we have numbers of progressive policies or even court decisions, but in reality still massive deforestations and also mining, legal or illegal mining, and many others, even land grabbing, and even many cases attacking human rights defenders, environmental defenders. So that's the reality in our regime situations. Hope this discussion will be continuing during your lunch, lunch session. Okay, thank you very much for your participation, and applause for us. Back to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Herlambang, Commissioner Ahmad Taufan Damanik, Commissioner Sandra Moniaga, for delivering a very great speech and also experience. I think we all here need some insights about what Komnas HAM has done to check or maybe to reinforce human right protection. Everyone, we have lunch in the first floor. Feel free to go down to the first floor to have lunch, and then we will have the 5th panel sessions. There will be 4 panel sessions in this room. In this room will be the first panel, and then the second panel, the third panel, and then the fourth panel is in the second floor. And we are also having a fellowship on freedom of religion and belief, a special panel. Please feel free.